Hi and welcome to this video in the QPSMR Going Deeper series, and in this video we're going to explore how to do variables in QPSMR Insight. Now some of this was covered in a previous video. We're going to go a little deeper here and look at some of the more complex things that you can do in terms of building variables in QPSMR Insight and how you might utilize them. So let's have a look at what we got here. In this particular questionnaire, you can see I've got question 1, which is a yes/no question. That filters question 2, people who say yes at question 1. Question 3 is a standard multi. Question 4 is an integer. Question 5 and 6, they're interesting in that they use the same code list, so they both got the same 7 responses. The first one's asking what they like most and other makes that they also like. Questions 7, 8 and 9 are integers, collecting expenditure on different aspects of their hobby in cycling. And 9 and 10, gender and age follow question 9 in the survey. So the first thing to say about variables and what they are is that you can define variables as many as you like in a project. Typically people put them at the bottom, but you don't have to. But one thing that is important, that when you define a variable, you must be referring to variables that are above where you've got the marker here or the cursor here. So I'm actually at the end of the list of questions, so I can refer to anything above, whereas if I had that marked at question 4, I could only refer to the questions above that. So first of all, what is a variable? So a variable allows you to combine things together that you've got in questions, filters, or other variables. So there's no problem defining a variable from a variable from a variable. That works perfectly well. You can reference any variables that you've already used. But let's start by perhaps something sort of fairly simple before we do that. What it'll do, it'll allow me to build up more complex things that I can do with my data to analyze it in a more interesting way. So let's start with question 2. Now question 2, if we look at that very quickly, has a list of responses here, every day down to don't know. And so it allows me to, perhaps I want to combine them together in some way. So one way of doing this without actually going into the project insert a variable menu is to copy an entry. So I could copy question 2 and I could just paste it back. It'll tell me it's already there. I can paste it back as a variable and I can put it after Q2. And you can see now I've got VQ2. So that's just taken a copy of VQ2. Now what I'm going to do in VQ2, if I just tabulated Q2 or VQ2 as they stood, I would get exactly the same answers. But I'm going to actually edit VQ2 so that it has some differences to it and gives me some additional information. Now one of the things I'm going to do is change it from a single to a multi. And my reason for doing that is I want to put in some summary codes in here. So quite often you might have a rating scale, for example, very good to very poor. You might want a top 2 box, besides people having very good and quite good separately. You might want anybody who gives a top 2 box or very or quite good. And perhaps the same with the bottom 2 box of people who say quite poor or very poor. So I need to make it a multi here, which is something that's important to remember, because every respondent has a chance of going into there twice. If they say, in the case of the very good, quite good example, very good, they're going to go in the very good individual code and they're going to go in that subtotal. So the variable is multi, even though the source question is single. And I'm going to do something like that here. I'm going to go into this and you can see the top answers here every day or most days. And I'm going to add in a response here that has people who say every or most days. So I'm going to insert a response. I'm going to define it. Insert. So this is quite similar to other syntax that we picked up before. I'm going to define it as coming from question 2, and it's a range of answers picking up those 2 codes. So this is pretty similar to what's been covered in previous videos. Click OK. The text I'm going to get is every ... most days, so I'm just going to edit that so it says every day or most days. It looks a bit easier to read, and if I OK that, now you can see I've got an extra row in there with a subtotal, and again that must be multi because a respondent that says every day or most days would go into this variable twice. I might decide that after at least once a week, I want to make that the less often code by combining perhaps these 4 codes here together. So let's do that. Let's insert a response here. I'm going to type the syntax this time. We'll cover this in a little bit more detail in a minute. I'm going to edit this as less often, and I'm going to delete the original 3 codes because I'm going to class everything as less than at least once a week as less often now, so I can just delete that. And you can see the variable I got that started the same as Q2 has now got a subtotal for every day or most days, and less often is now defined as anybody who's less than at least once a week. And now, of course, I can save that and I can use that in a table. So if I quickly do a table on that, I'm going to pick gender in here and run that. And you can see now I've got 3 people in the everyday or most days category, 2 of which were the everyday, 1 was most days, and my less often now is just 1 in here, whereas that might have come from any of the 3 codes previously, but that's obviously the analysis that I'm going to get here. So that's the first thing you can do in terms of variables. There's that quick way. If you want a variable that's quite similar to what you've got already, you can just use the copy and paste tools and then edit it to make it different in the way that you want it to be slightly different. The other use of a variable, which I know has been covered in previous videos, is where you want to set up a banner that you want to use for a series of tables. So down here at the bottom, we might want to see gender, age, and question 1 as a banner, so that we can show that on every table for every single question. So let's insert. So now I'm using the insert menu. I'm picking variable. I'm going to call it banner. I want multi-coding allowed because respondents are going to go into more than one of these places in the banner. And I'm going to click responses. And the feature I'm going to use here to get this together fairly quickly is the block insert feature. So block insert, gender, and there they are. So pasted in for me quickly. Age, block insert, question 1. I'm going to put question 1 on the end. And you can see I've got pretty much all that work done for me. Now I could have selected those as individual responses. I could have said insert response gender 1, insert response gender 2, insert response age 1, insert response age 2, and so on, and I would have got the same result. Block insert's just a quick way of putting everything in. And of course, having got that there, I can collapse some of these together. So for example, I might only want to see 35 pluses as one row or element of my variable, so I could just edit this, and I could edit the syntax to ... 4. And you can see it's pulled in the text 35 to 54, 55 plus, which doesn't quite make sense. I can just edit that to be 35 plus. And now I might want to delete that response so that my groupings for age are 16 to 24 separately and 25 to 34, but 35 plus as a category that puts 2 other original response codes together. And the other thing I might do here to make this look nicer on my tables and easier to read is to put in some headings. So you might put in a heading here which says gender, and the backslash is the character that tells it that it's a heading. And I might put in age range here, and I might put bicycle ownership in here, so that I've got headings for each of my groups. And now I can save that, and I can use that in a tabulation. So I could do tables, quick tables. Let's put banner across the top. That's the usual thing to do with it. And I could just grab every question here if I wanted to. Run that, and now I've got a standard set of tables with gender, age, and bicycle ownership across the top. And there's my tables for every question analysed by those 3 things. So that's one use of a variable, building a banner so that you can put various things together. Let's look a little bit more in building a banner now, if you want to be a little bit more specific, or just generally building a variable. So just look at the tools we've got. So let's start again now. I'm going to call this banner 2. I'm going to leave it as multi-coding allowed again, and click responses. Now there's 2 ways, just like there are with defining filters or variables, simple variables, there's two ways of doing that. You can either do it from the definition button, or you can click the syntax. So you can insert a response here. I can go to the definition, insert. I could pick people who are gender, female, and I could add to that if I wanted to, insert, age, range, and pick those two categories. So I've now got females that are 16 to 34, and it puts it out in a fairly long-handed way, so I'd rather retype that, female 16 to 34, and that becomes the text for that response. And I could type in something else now, so I could insert another response here, and I could do the same thing. I could click on definition. I might pick someone who says yes at question 1, and they are 55 plus. And we'll call that owner 55 plus. So that's one way of specifying things. I'm not going to go through all the features in here. They're covered in separate videos on how to define things using these things on filters. But suffice to say here, if you click on the define button, you can go into here and you can define quite complex definitions with and things together. If you want to use an or definition, you can just check this here and you can switch that to or. Now that's not what I want here. I wouldn't want people who said question 1 or age of 4. But let's say you wanted two codes that are not consecutive, for example. Let's say we want to get people from question 3. So I might want to here go into question 3 and pick people that read perhaps Cycling Today or Cycling World. So I could pick Cycling Today, click OK, insert again, pick Cycling World, OK. Now by default, what QPS will do here is put the word and in here to mean that people who have read both Cycling World at question 3 and Cycling Today. If we want either of those, we need to click on that and select or, and we now get Cycling Today or Cycling World. Let's call that reader. And now that's gone in as a row on my tables, or in my variable for a table. If you want negatives, you can go into definition again. So we could pick people at question 3 who read Cycling Today and not Cycling World. So now we can pick the negative of that. So there's the negative button. And that will pick people who said not Cycling World, but they did say Cycling Today. So we might just edit that, Cycling Today reader, but Cycling World, CW. Okay, and we've got that now in our variable. And of course, you can edit any of these you want to. You can just double click on them, go back to definition, and you can edit this. You can change that or to an and. You could redefine this as a different one on your list, or you could pick a range, and so on. These answers at the these options at the bottom here are less commonly used. These are people who want to check if you want to check a particular question or variable is blank, has one answer, or more than one answer. So you might want to find people who have got more than one magazine that they have read here. So that would be a perfectly valid test that you could do. So let's just do that very quickly. Let's cancel that. Go to the bottom, add another response, into definition, insert, question 3, and I want somebody who's got more than one response here. Okay, OK, and there it's put out just the letter M. We need to edit that, so more than one magazine read. Okay, so we've added that now to our variable that we're building here of different types of people that we're perhaps interested in. So that's using the insert response feature to build a variable. You also can learn how to use the syntax here. So in the syntax, we could have just typed this in a shorthand way. We could say we want Q3 of 1 and Q3 of 3. So that's people who read on two wheels and my bike. So you can see here that I've just spaced this out as I want to. I could put more spaces or no spaces in there. That doesn't matter. I've already put the space in between the and just to make it a bit more readable as I do it. The text here is fine. I could just make that lowercase perhaps. And add the word reader perhaps, something like that. And you can see the minute I go away from this box here, it's actually changed my word and to a dot and put dollar signs on the front. They're all optional ways of working. The dollar's not mandatory. It would understand what you want with or without the dollar, but you can type the dollar if you want to. And you can type a dot for and a plus sign for or if you wish to. If you want not, you have to put the N, which means not, after the forward slash and before the code that you want it to apply to. So that's what you would do if you wanted to do that. So there's various ways that you can enter these things, and I think probably you find that actually once you've got used to using the variable builder, that it's quicker to actually type the syntax in than actually using these definition buttons here, which can make it sometimes a little bit more complicated, particularly if the definitions get even more complex, which we'll come to in just a second. So there's our sixth definition that we put into this variable here of different types of people. The other thing that you can do is use brackets. Now I find that quite complicated to do, or more complicated to do, when you do it as a response. So we enter response now, we go to definition again. So we could pick people who read question 3 on two wheels. Okay. And my bike. So that's people who read on two wheels and my. Now if you want to do more complicated definitions where perhaps you want to have something like that, and then say or people who say 2 and codes 2 and 4, I think that gets quite complicated. You can do it by actually specifying groups here and showing where the groups begin and end. I actually find this easier to do in the syntax. It all seems much more logical. So if you type in Q3-1 and Q3-3 or bracket Q3-2 and Q3-4, I think that actually becomes a lot easier. So now we've got people who either read both of those two magazines, On Two Wheels and My Bike, or they read both of those two magazines, and we could put that text in just like that. We'll leave it as that for now, but we could give it some other piece of text to make that clear. So you can use brackets. You have to put groups if you're going to do it through the definition module, but I think it's actually easier to do it through the syntax. You can see now what it's reversed it to is dollars on the names, dots for and plus for or. But if you just type that again as or, it would work absolutely fine. It would understand what you want. Oops, I've just done that wrongly there, I think. But you can just revert that back if you want to at any one time. So we'll just do that again. Q3-1 and Q3-3, or Q3-2 and Q3-4. And now I've got my original definition there that I had before I deleted it. All right, so that's building a variable with different definitions. Let's save that. Let's do a table of that. So let's analyze that. Let's do a quick table to see if it's actually produced something. And we could do an analysis of banner 2 by banner 2 here. And we've got some people. So you can see I've got 4 people who are in the 16 to 34 category. And I can see what magazines they read down here. And that's overflowed down here onto a separate page. So I've done a cross analysis effectively of those 7 conditions that I specified, and we might use something to space that out so it's a bit more readable than I've made it here by either reducing the text or using a format option to space the table out. But that seems to have worked quite well. You'll see that any of these variables we define get the butterfly symbol in here, so we know that they're variables. The original questions have a Q, and that symbol is used for a filter, so they're easy to pick out later on if you want to edit them or change them in any way. And as I said earlier, you can build variables from these variables. So I could build another variable now that refers to banner or banner 2 or VQ2 even if I wanted to. That will be all totally acceptable. All right, let's move on now and look at defining integers. Now I'm going to define an integer now that adds together these three values here at questions 7, 8 and 9 to get a total expenditure. These three questions here ask what expenditure they have related to maintaining their bicycle, on activities and any other costs. So I'm going to add them three together to get a total cost. Now again, to get that I would need the cursor to at least be here. I don't mind putting it here. Let's put it here. Let's put a variable in. I'm going to put Q7-9, Q9. That's my variable name. I'm going to change the type to an integer. And you can see now that responses disappear. I can still specify a filter here. I haven't talked about filters yet, but you can specify filters just like you can on questions, so nothing new there. You'll see that this box here has become activated now. And what this means is treat undefined U as 0 in arithmetic. So what QPS does by default is that it will treat any blank field as being undefined or null. So when I'm adding these three figures together, if somebody gave an answer of 10 for the first of those three questions, 20 for the next, but didn't have an answer for the third one, it would treat that as an undefined answer and return undefined to my total. However, if I check this box here, it would cheat a little, if you like, and change the value of the undefined or the blank to be 0, so that 10 plus 20 plus blank would be 30. And you'll have to decide for each occasion whether you want to treat blanks as an undefined or null value, or whether you want to treat them as a 0. So all I'm going to do here is specify that I want this variable to be Q7 plus Q8 plus 9. I could put dollars on the front again if I wanted to, and I'm going to title this as total expenditure on cycling. Click OK, and there's a variable now that has that information in a variable. Now I might want to put that into some ranges as well, so I could do another variable from this variable. So I could say insert another variable, and let's call it VQ7 to Q9, and this is going to be single expenditure cycling, and now I can do some ranges. So I could insert a response here. I'm going to type it in this time. I'm going to say Q7-Q9, let's say 1 to 20, Q7-Q9, 21 to 50, and just to do the last one through a definition, insert Q7 more than, you can see I've got all the ranges here, 50. Okay, so now I've got more than 50, and you can see I use ... there to mean in the range of. It's a shorthand. I could have used that on the previous variable and on this one here. So now I've got them in some ranges. I can click OK. I can save this, save the variables, and I can do a quick table on that. And I could analyze that by my banner if I wanted to. Run that. And we can now see that actually I've not got a very clever variable here. Everybody spends more than 50, whatever dollars it is, on their cycling. So my splits weren't particularly useful. But you can see that the variable has worked and everybody's gone into one of the categories there. And of course I can edit that variable and change those ranges. I could just go in here now and say, okay, those ranges didn't really work. I might edit this to be 1 to 100, edit this to be 101. So I didn't actually change the definition there. Let's change that again. 1 to 100. Let's change this one to be 101 to 300. And let's change this to be greater than 300. And now perhaps I'll get some more meaningful data. Or maybe I've gone too high. Quick tables. Here we are. Let's type banner in again. Hopefully we're going to get something a bit more useful. Indeed, I've got now 1 in the 1 to 100 category, 1 in the 1 to 300, and 2 of them are above 300. So it looks like my table's working, and we could have wanted to put a mean score on the bottom of that to show the actual mean score. So that's doing some variables there that add things together and then do a variable from that addition. And we can look at another type of variable now where you do a count function to see how many answers have been given. So if I'm looking at question 3 now, you can see in question 3 there are 5 magazines plus one of them that says none of these. Now if I wanted to count how many of those magazines have been answered, I want to actually do a count on just the first 5. Now if I just do a count on question 3 as a whole, it's going to just include the none of these with a count of 1, because they could have said none of these and that would just count like a magazine. So I'm first of all here going to define a variable, and we'll do it here. Insert an entry, variable, I'm going to call it Q3X just to give it a different name, magazines. So we're going to go through a couple of steps to achieve what I want to do here. And I'm going to block insert question 3, but I'm going to remove the none of these so that I'm only doing my count on the actual magazines. I don't want to include people who said none of these. So that's okay. Now I want to do a count on Q3X to see how many magazines they actually do read. So I'm going to insert a variable now, and I'm going to call this count Q3, call it an integer, and the arithmetic I'm going to use now is count Q3X. So what that's going to give me is the number of answers given in that variable Q3X, which just has the 5 magazines in it. Number of magazines read. So that's my variable. And now if I wanted to, I could band that into some ranges like I did for VQ7 to Q9. I could say people who read no magazines, 1 magazine, 2 to 3 magazines, and so on. Or of course I could just do a table on this data here on the actual integer. So I can do a quick table. I need to click on the rows and say I want to list all rows, otherwise I'll just get a mean score. And let's analyze that by banner. And sure enough, you can see I've got 3 people who read 2 magazines and 1 person who reads 1 magazine. And of course I could have grouped that differently. Nobody reads no magazines. And I've got a table out of the number of magazines that each of my 4 respondents read, and nobody reads more than 2, we can see from that. So that's one thing that we can do, is we can build variables that count the number of answers, but we're excluding, as I say, in that step, that's an extra step to exclude particular magazines that we don't want. Now, let's save that. Now, you might have noticed that when inserting variables, there's something I've not mentioned yet. Let's make a new variable. Go into responses. You might have noticed that we've got some definitions here that are available called F, T and R. And I've not mentioned those so far, and there's something that's not available when you're defining questions. So much of this looks just like the questions worksheet, but this is different for variables. F, T and R have a special meaning. F means false, T means true, and R means reject. Well, reject just means you want anybody who's not in the variable so far. So if we had added a reject to VQ7-Q9, anybody who didn't fit into any of those classifications that I specified, those 6 or 7 classifications, would have just ended up in the reject category if I'd have put a response in with R here. So you can see it puts the word reject out, and I can change it to don't know, not state. So I could, for example, here in the responses, I could go down to the end, add in a response, which is a reject, give it the text, not stated, and 0 response it, so it doesn't come out if it happens to be 0. But now I've got a category that catches anybody who didn't give an answer at Q7 to Q9. I think everybody did as it happened, so it won't actually have any effect in this case, but with more data that obviously can change. Now also on that list there you saw or may have seen the false and true, and you might ask yourself, why do you want false and true in a variable? Now if we look at, you may have seen there that we had options in the variable to do false and true, and you might ask yourself why you want that. Now, one of the examples of that is when you want to put a question side by side. So there is an option to do that using true and false. So you might want to do a table where you've got question 5 and 6 side by side, as it were, two summary columns of data. So question 5 appears next to question 6, just the total only data. And we can do that doing true and false. So I can now set up a variable now. Let me do variable, and I'm going to call this var1. I'm going to make it single, and I'm going to call this banner Q5 and Q6. Insert response. The definition is going to be true for the first answer, and I'm going to call the text Q5. And the next one is going to be false, and I'm going to call that Q6. And as I build this table, you'll see what I'm doing here. So that's var1. I'm going to insert another variable called var2, and that's going to be the reverse. So that can be single as well. So that's the same thing, but I can do this the other way around this time. So I'm going to put false in here and call that Q5 again. I could have copied and pasted this probably more quickly. Put true in here, call it Q6, and OK that, and OK that. So what I can do now is I can build a table. Now I have to do this in a proper table because quick tables won't do this for me. So I'm going to open up a tables file. I'm going to call this my tables. So having opened up my tables, I can now put some tables in, and what I'm going to do here to achieve the table I'm looking to get with Q5 and Q6 side by side is I'm going to do a standard table, and the columns are going to be var1 and the rows are going to be Q5. So that's Q5 by var1, so that'll just give me the true in there, and I'm going to put in here an option nptc so I don't print the total column because that's not relevant to me. And I can do another table now, and I'm going to overlay it on the previous table. I'm going to pick var2 here and Q6, and what that should give me, so let's the format in, there we go, and save that and run it, and now I should get question 5 and question 6 side by side. So there's a sort of a total column of Q5 and Q6 side by side. And there are other ways of doing that. You'll see in the tables actually that you can actually overlay tables and put them side by side, as well as overlaying them on top of each other. That's for another video. I just wanted to show you a variable that allowed you to do that. So that completes this video on defining variables. I hope it's been useful to you. Obviously there's many more videos in our QPS series. In this particular series we've been looking at the QPSMR going deeper. Thank you.